Now, the second half of 2 Samuel gives us some quite long, well-developed stories. And it's also a family history, tragic family history even. Because one of the things that it will accomplish in the frame of the book as a whole is clear the way for Solomon to succeed. But it does so in a rather colorful way.
Yeah, I mean, we have, again, we talked about how there are so many characters, well-developed characters in Samuel, and we get a number of them here. We start to learn something more about David's sons, particularly his two eldest, Amnon and Absalom. Neither of whom will survive the end of the book, but we do meet them and get to know them a little bit, and it's through them that we see sort of David's power start to fade somewhat.
Starts to fade. Now, Amnon really does not come off very well.
No, he doesn't.
He has one splashy episode in which he seduces his sister.
Yeah, half-sister, to be fair. Right, so one of the things to remember, and perhaps one of the reasons he doesn't come off so well, is that Amnon is David's eldest.
Yeah.
Right? David's eldest, born to David when he was perhaps in the wilderness, perhaps on the run from Saul. It seems like he sort of represents the past in a way. Right? Again, he absolutely needs to clear the way for Solomon, right? The truly royal, right? The son who was born at the height of David's powers.
Yes.
Amnon, yes, unfortunately, his entire narrative career involves seducing his half-sister Tamar, who is full sister with his brother Absalom. And this is important because this is, of course, how Amnon ends up dying.
And also how Absalom gets to be alienated from...
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what happens, of course, is that Amnon seduces Tamar, and Absalom finds out about it and kills him. Right? Invites him to a party.
Now, I mean, this is a great story, make great television. Is there, could we say, some moral sensitivity in this story? I think moral sensitivity has been in rather short supply in the books of Samuel.
Well, one could certainly make the case, right? Absalom's, emotion upon discovering, that his sister has been violated, certainly resonates, and the retribution that we see for Amnon's crimes, certainly. I have to say, I probably see a little less of it than you do. My sense, if only because one of the interesting facets here, and I'd be interested to hear your take. One of the interesting facets is that when Tamar says to Amnon, right, "Don't do this," right, what she says is not right. It's not incest that's the problem, right? The problem is he didn't ask the king first. Right? She says, just ask the king, and he'll give me to you as wife. Right? That's not the problem. So I mean, I don't want to go too far in the direction of sort of representing our current sort of moral sense.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it does give what I would take to be a sympathetic portrayal of Tamar.
Absolutely.
And you see, after he has had his way with her, then he loathes her and thrusts her out. And there is a moment of actual feeling for Tamar.
Yeah.
Now, that's very rare in the Hebrew Bible.
It is.
There are other women who have awful things done to them, but you very seldom get any glimmer of sympathy from their point of view.
Right. One of the other ones, of course, is actually the other Tamar.
Yeah.
The other Tamar in Genesis 38,
yeah.
who similarly, I mean, there's a lot of patterning here for sure.
Yes.
In one direction or the other, I'm not sure which.
Yeah.
But another woman who has, sort of, some sexual marital issues, and who comes out on top.
Now, I think part of the charm of these stories is that they do not, even though at least a modern reader will feel sympathy for Tamar in this case, they don't hit you over the head with it.
Yeah.
They're not spelling out the lesson of it. Certainly Kings tends to be more didactic in this way. So, whoever wrote these stories, I think, was a pretty good storyteller.
Oh, I think there's no
And
question.
that part of the appeal of them is the kind of insight into human nature, which doesn't always lead to a clear moral resolution. But the point I take it that you would make is that all of this is subordinated here to a plot.
Well, there is certainly, there is something that needs to be done, right? Amnon, the firstborn, needs to be eliminated.
Yep.
And
not only, but there's also, you might say, a damnatio memoriae.
yeah,
That not only is he eliminated,
yeah,
but nobody's going to feel any sympathy for him.
this is true. And the same will be true of the second one,
Of
Absalom.
Now, what do you think of Absalom?
He is very much like his father. Absalom, I think, is very David-like. He
Yeah.
is also ambitious.
Yeah.
He's also ambitious. He's also, I think, quite willing to do whatever it takes. He had no hesitation in killing Amnon when he feels Tamar's rights have been violated. He's then sort of exiled for a time while David mourns Amnon.
Yeah.
He's then brought back, but as soon as he's brought back, he starts a power play, right? He starts to convince people to follow him rather than David.
But you feel at this point he has been alienated from David.
Yeah.
And so, he's not an altogether unattractive character.
No, and of course,
He's
he
equally
is
not
supposed to
altogether.
be perhaps the most attractive character in the Bible, physically at least, right? He
Yes.
also, very much like Saul, right? He's supposed to be, this beautiful man with, of course, his famously long hair, which will
Yep.
get him tangled up in all sorts of trouble.
Moral of the story is, get
Keep
a
your hair
haircut.
short. That's it.
But then, in a way, I don't think there's so much interest in the character of Absalom in himself as that he becomes a foil to show an attractive side of David's character.
Well, this is true, right? He allows, in his death, right, he allows for David to express this great, famous mourning, right? Absalom, O Absalom, my son, which is, heart-rending, even if we may admit that politically David probably needed Absalom to die, right? You can't have two people claiming the
right.
throne.
Yes.
One of them was going to die at the end of the story. There was no other possible ending.
And you see, there is a wonderful pattern running through the book of people that David needs to die. And then David does lamentations better than just
Yes.
about anybody.
And right, he does. And Joab does the killing better than just about anybody.
Just about anybody, yes.
One of the things about Absalom is the reason, one of the things that is useful about his story is that what he demonstrates is seemingly how quickly the people are actually willing to give up on David. That is, Absalom says, follow me, and according to the text, basically everybody does.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much for the population to swing their loyalty to Absalom rather than David.
David is yesterday's man, as Marco Rubio would say. David.
Yeah, so, in this sort of succession of rulers, the people perhaps haven't gotten quite used to the notion of permanence, as it were.
Indeed, and in fact, in the Northern Kingdom, they never really got used to it.
And so Absalom's charisma is, I think, appealing to them.
Appealing to them.
But Absalom, of course, dies as well.
Yeah. Now, we'll move on to the deathbed scene of David, which I think is a great passage in many ways.
Yeah.
When David's time to die drew near, he charged his son Solomon, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong, be courageous. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways, keeping his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. Now, this, of course, is straight Deuteronomy. This is clearly inserted here as an edifying message, and how impressed you ought to be with
The last thing that David seems to have done in all of his time on the throne was closely consult Deuteronomy for the book of the law for advice.
Actually, in most of the stories about David, would you even know that there was such a thing as the law of Moses?
No, certainly all of his decisions seem to be motivated by pure political pragmatism.
Yeah. And Moses really wasn't part of his tradition,
No.
even. And going forward, the tradition of Jerusalem, down until you get to Deuteronomy, you're not going to get a lot of the law of Moses.
Yeah.
But then he goes on. After this nice pious beginning, Moreover, you know also what Joab son of Zeruiah did to me, and how he dealt with the 2 commanders of the armies of Israel, whom he murdered, retaliating in time of peace for blood that had been shed in war, and putting the blood of war on the belt around his waist and on the sandals of his feet. Act therefore according to your wisdom. Do not let his grey head go down to Sheol in peace.
Yeah, and this will go on. I mean, there's a few of these, right? We want to get rid of Joab, and also we want to be kind to Barzillai.
And there's this guy Shimei.
Right, I mean, he needs to be removed also.
Because he cursed David. You can't trust that guy.
Yeah. In the same way that we had David in the wilderness acting like a young gangster, right,
Yes.
running an extortion racket, this could be lifted directly out of Godfather, right? Out of a scene where, on his deathbed, right, in his old age, right, the mafia don says, there were some things I couldn't take care of in my lifetime. You'll know what to do.
Yeah.
You'll know what to do.
You're a wise man.
Right. And Solomon is the Bible's Michael Corleone.
You might almost say you're a wise guy. Yeah. Of course, also this would be almost standard practice in successions to monarchy.
Oh, sure.
First thing a king did is kill off anybody who's a danger.
Sure. I mean, and we see this actually as something that happens later on, right? When Jehu becomes king, right? He goes and kills all 70 of the descendants of Ahab and is praised to the skies for it, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what you do, and that's how it happens.
So now we both teach in a divinity school, and how do we present this to students who want to go to preach on it later on? David, we're told, is a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Before it starts, before he shows up, you sort of think you know what it means, and by the end, you have to wonder. Some of the things that he does, many of the things that he does, don't seem to be morally or ethically, desirable.
He is a murderer.
He is.
He may not do the killing himself, but he gets people killed.
And he's an extortionist, and he's
an adulterer.
And an adulterer, right? So we could probably go on.
I think you could just probably go down the 10 Commandments. If he missed one, it was by accident. Maybe not idolatry.
Well, maybe not.
Maybe that's what kept him on side.
But so part of this is, part of the question, I suppose, is, right, how do we reconcile that David that you get from reading the stories with the David that's described in the phrase, man after God's own heart, and the David that has come to be sort of part of tradition, the David that went on to be the ancestor and in many cases model for the Messiah. What does it mean that we have, this sort of dissonance between those two figures?
It seems to me there is, to begin with, a certain degree of dissonance in the biblical narrative itself. Mm-hmm. And it's nicely illustrated, I think, here in the book of Samuel. On the one hand, you have realistic narrative. Whether this be historical, prose fiction, whatever it is, it tells stories about human beings in a way that seems remarkably true to human psychology, and it gives you insight into human nature. The pleasure and insight you get from it is like what you get from reading a good novel. Yeah. Don't worry about moral. You can draw your own moral inferences. Right. The text isn't going to draw them for you. That's right.
And this is one of these rare long blocks of text where God very rarely shows up and intervenes. That's right. The people act, and they suffer the repercussions, good or bad.
But then the Deuteronomist isn't quite as restrained as God. And the Deuteronomist, in the end, does show up. Yeah. And wants to remind you that, of course, what you really should be doing is keeping the commandments and following the law of Moses. And these passages stick out a little bit because they are so out of kilter in a way.
Yeah. I mean, there is some of the tension in the book, I think, stems from stories that were written and told sort of at the moment, right, in the time of David, right, giving us sort of like the on-the-ground scene, And then those stories being framed and edited sometime quite a bit thereafter,
Yes.
where the perspective had changed somewhat and the interests had changed, and we wanted to put a certain, more appropriate stamp on it.
At some point, I suppose we'll get to the books of Chronicles, which really go overboard in whitewashing.
That's right.
These characters.
And I think, and this is one of the reasons that I think it's most likely that what we have in Samuel is authentic, or at least very close to Davidic period writing, because I know exactly what it looks like when somebody wants to write the story of David when nobody has a memory of what he was like. And it looks like Chronicles, where there are no murders, there is no Bathsheba, there's no Goliath also, but there's no Absalom's revolt. Right? All of the things that make this story compelling and that give it the drama are all completely missing later on. The drama, I think, really comes from people saying, we got to tell the story the way it was.
And they did a good job.
They did a great job.